Great. I guess we're live. Welcome to Holo's launch brief. So this is going to be a new short format live stream that we're going to do every few weeks. And basically, this is to keep everyone apprised of how our work that we're doing to drive towards the launch of the Holo network is going. Today, it's just going to be me. I'm Mary Camacho. I'm the CEO, Executive Director of Holo. And, in other, whatever we call them, episodes or sessions of the Holo launch brief, I'll also invite a few other folks from the team to join me, basically so they can be other voices answering some of the questions that people are asking. So kind of to give a little bit of context, Holo's been actively in development of the hosting platform for many years. We shared a lot of the history in a prior live stream, so as to bring everybody up to date, so that everybody who's been following this project, but who started following in recent years, could kind of have a sense of what had happened in the past. And in the past few months, we've been targeting our launch of the network. We had said that our goal to launch was in Q2, but in that last live stream, we changed that expectation to say Q3 of 2024. So today is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to start this update with first addressing what led to that change. But then normally in each of these, the way it's going to go is that we'll share a view of what we're doing on our path to launch. We'll give a little bit of an introduction to our launch process and then share a bit about what's been accomplished recently and what we're currently working on, whether there's any challenges, any hurdles that we're facing about it. We'll answer some of the questions that have come in, either from the previous session that we weren't maybe able to answer or in the interim. And then we'll take questions out of the live stream and we'll answer those from the people who are watching. Yeah, so basically what that means is that anything that we can't answer today for whatever reason, if I don't have the technical details or it's something we can't talk about yet or whatever it might be, we'll just push that over into the next brief. If it's not about the launch, it might be also funneled into other areas of our communications. So we'll acknowledge that as we go through this process. Yeah, so let's just get started, and we're going to start with the questions that came in after the last live stream, which were really all about what are the reasons for the delay? What are the dependencies, the roadblocks, and or mitigations? Are there other is the audit a factor? Those are some of the things that people were asking after the last live stream. And the reality is that there's quite a wide variety of reasons for the delay. It didn't come down to any one major issue. So we have a framework for risk management. It's something we've had for a lot of years and we use in our operations. And back in 2023, in preparation for the alpha release at the end of the year, we had done a pass on our risk brainstorming and our risk process, the beginning parts of the risk process that we do. In Q1 of 2023, we actually expanded who in the team was participating in this process. And we identified dependencies with HoloChain that we hadn't really had it in our awareness for the launch. We added these to the plan. We also began the process of getting the third-party audits that we've talked about in the past. And that this is a key part of our risk mitigation as well. We did get some of the feedback, but that I don't know if that came before or after we were already talking about the shift from Q2 to Q3. But anyway, we also these audits are still underway. We've received some feedback and we're making changes, but those changes are part of what's in our plan now, and it did have some impact into timing, of course, because it takes developer and testing time to do those. Those audits are actually going to be published before we launch. So we're getting more than just one audit done. We've already had two that have been started. They're not complete yet. And there's several more that are still coming. We identified some additional changes that through the risk process that I was talking about. We identified some things that we wanted to make our platform more secure, more stable, more reliable. And we added those. And that means additional time for development and our testing teams. And then finally, We also found during this process that we had dependencies on some of the work that's taking place with our Holochain components team. And this is a team that we rely on for the non-hosted app ecosystem. What that means is that Holo hosted applications are going to need to work seamlessly with applications that are both in the hosted environment, but also in the local environment. So you've probably heard of the Holochain launcher and seen things that are being installed and run locally. Every application that is run locally that is also hosted has to work seamlessly. So we especially had some dependencies there because HoloFuel is one of those apps that has to run both in a local and in a hosted environment. So to wrap up, I mean, really, the reasons why for the delay were based on our due diligence processes that are working the right way. And through them, we identified the key dependencies necessary for launch and we added them into our plan. So as we go through the update, I'm going to share a little bit about all the groups that are working to have the launch come to fruition. These include our delivery teams. It includes our finance team, the HoloChain components team, the HoloChain core team. We've got both of our Holo product development teams. And then we have folks who are involved in an operational capacity in the launch process. And we've got a new group that we've put together basically for platform operations, because this is a big change we're making from always having been in development to having to be in development and have the live launched platform running. So we've got support and delivery, and we're monitoring services, things like that. And then we have a group also that is doing a lot of the testing, the audits, and the reporting. So let's dive into this a little bit. I think we could share screen a little bit. I'm going to talk about this thing that we do. Every week, we have a sync meeting, and this goes across our delivery dev teams and also across all the teams involved in the launch. And essentially, we're reviewing what you're seeing in front of you. This is a large plan. It tracks all of our dependencies and our progress. And the detail of all of these things that you're seeing in here are actually living mostly in other systems. But we found a way to basically have all of the teams that have launch critical work show up here so that we can see the end to end. We'll look at some details about this in a minute, but this is the thing that we do week in and week out. This plan is always changing. Where what you see in that plan, or if anybody's like zooming in to look at it, and what we show a little bit later in a larger view, we're not promising dates with this. We are changing these. This is our active planning process. We're changing these every week as we make progress. Some things are done early, some things take a little bit longer. It really varies, and we're coordinating across all of our teams at every step. So in some of the future briefs, you might see that additional tasks are added in as some of our, say, our delivery or our testing groups are refining what they're doing and adding more specificity. Most of adding things like that is work that's just being done in parallel, where we might have like a larger task that's being broken down. But we're always adjusting the development, the review, and the testing work as well. So things are changing in this, and it isn't meant to be sort of like a truth with a capital T on it. It's an active process. So in the past few weeks, we've made some really important headway on Holochain dependencies, and we're currently updating all of the apps in the Holo platform to the latest version of Holochain. So when we say we have Holochain dependencies, what this usually means is Holochain's doing changes to Holochain core. They're adding features, they're incorporating things that we need. They have to go through all of their processes and then deploy a version of Holochain that we can then incorporate into the Holochain platform, or the Holo platform. And the way that we do that is we update all of the applications to the platform. We correct for any changes and dependencies in the code that are necessary, and then we start testing in that new version. And then usually what that does, it unblocks some of the work that we're doing. For example, Holochain recently basically got deep key integrated as a conductor service for Holochain. This is necessary for some of the changes that we're making to HoloPorts. It's not something that we're using in every place, but there were a couple things that need to be done pre-launch that this was important for. They've also finished doing a big epic on app validation, and we needed that work to be able to do some baseline and comparison testing on how our apps are running. We've recently wrapped up some important security mitigation work. Some of that came out of what I was describing in our risk processes. We've also wrapped up some of the launch critical spikes, actually most of the launch critical spikes. These are the places where we still have questions about our final implementation. Yeah, in this view, what you're seeing in front of you right now is really like that line that's going down, that blue line that goes down the middle of the screen. It's sort of like, this is where we are today. And you can see things on the left that have either been completed, things that are crossing the line are in flux, that we're working on, and things that haven't touched, the line hasn't touched. We haven't started yet, typically. And this is what we keep updating every week. So we've also completed some of the recommendations from the first audit of HoloFuel. We're planning a second review on that as well, and some of the additional reviews, which I can talk about in more detail later. We've recently completed a browser extension for key management for Holo. This one's really interesting. In the past, if you were one of the alpha testers and you've tested any of the apps that were hosted on Holo, you logged in by just putting in your name and your password. And that's great for certain kinds of apps like chat or things like that. But we wanted to make sure that we were, because this process is really doing key management in the browser, we wanted a more secure way of doing that. So we now have a browser extension for that. And we'll have lots of details coming out about that in the future, some documentation, probably some demos, things like that. We've finished the bulk of our planning for all of our disaster recovery and backup procedures. We're now getting into the fine-grained detail on some of the mitigation paths for those and socializing all of this across our teams. We're working on some of the internal systems that we need in place to support the platform. These are things that help us with our internal operations, like our finance team, delivery team, our support teams, because they need to be able to know certain things to be able to do, our help desk, run our help desk, or to even do our accounting, right? Since HoloFuel is an accounting currency that we're using in our organization. So these are some of the important things that we've been working on. The last thing that we're working on actively right now is that work on the Holochain launcher. That's the components team is working on the new version of the Holochain launcher. And so there's a lot happening in parallel across a lot of the teams. I'm going to shift into answering a few of the carryover questions from things that came in since the last live stream, and then we'll open it up and I'll take some of the questions that are coming in today. So let's see here. We've got a question about when is not beta anymore? What is the actual achievement? Well, a couple things I want to say about that. One is we're not calling it beta anymore. We're just calling it launch. This was just decided to make things much more clear, because launch is when things become generally available and stay available. So right now in alpha, we've had applications hosted there at different times for different lengths of time. But they haven't been running in the standard way where anybody's getting paid in HoloFuel. HoloFuel has never been live. It's always been test fuel. So when we get to launch, HoloFuel is live. And when we get to launch, applications that are hosted on the Holo network, on the Holo platform, will stay on the Holo platform. And if they don't, it's because the app manager decides to not host them anymore. Not because we're making changes on the platform, because we're in a development process. So that was the first one. Let's see. The next question that was a carryover is, are there any major roadblocks that need to be resolved or are still in the works, like the issue with the yellow lights on HoloPorts or a network failure that was reported on the forum? I don't have specific things on the yellow lights because I haven't had to delve into some of the tier 2 support, but I do know that as we have been making some changes, as we have been moving HoloPorts from one environment to another, because we have dev environments, we have Holochain test environments, and we have Holo QA environments and Holo alpha environments. And the HoloPorts that are in the alpha program, they move around these environments because we need different numbers of those HoloPorts and in different environments at different times. So different things can happen to those. Like, for instance, we updated one of the environments, but we didn't have a full update that was ready to go. So some of the infrastructure was working and some of it wasn't. I think that's what created the yellow lights on those HoloPorts. And it wasn't something that mattered immediately. We were waiting for some other updates before we could finish doing the QA and updating our alpha environment, for example. I don't know about the network failure. I do know that there was a failure that happened in the holochain side of infrastructure at one point, and this has had to do with some shifts we were making. Back a few months ago, we've made some updates in holochain where we were going to be changing out sort of how the networking, kind of how you got into applications in the fully distributed context. And our turn server infrastructure and our signal server infrastructure needed to go through a transformation. I think that might have caused some of the reports that people may have made on the forum. I'm not certain about that. I know that a lot of this stuff has been in flux. These are the things we've actively been working on. Some of them we've completed, some of them we haven't. But that's the reason some of these things show up. Great. So we're going to move into, oh my goodness, we're getting lots of questions. Could we use soon our HoloPorts? 4 years from now, I'm holding it in dust covering the machine. Yes. Well, the HoloPorts, if you're in the alpha program, the HoloPorts are being used now, and they're being used for development, testing, QA, and all of that. I mean, we're running scale testing for Holochain. We're running some tests for applications inside of the Holo context. That's the form of use that's happening in the alpha program. Until we launch, until we get to that launch milestone, the HoloPorts are not being used in the live way that they're intended. So I would say yes, and I think this is the conversation about when it's going to be available. Right now, we're targeting, our goal right now, as you can see, is Q3. If you were kind of looking at the animation really quickly, that we're kind of projecting an August thing, but it's not in stone. We're not certain about that. That's just where the plan is lining up this week. It could change tomorrow. It could change next week. But we're targeting that Q3 to get this out. So, question: how can HoloPort owners assist with the launch? Well, that's a great question. If you're in the alpha program, we have a couple different ways that people are participating. Some of them are just as providing the HoloPort for it. We also have alpha testers that do things specifically. I would say going onto the forum is the first. The Holo forum is where we have folks that are doing alpha testing for us, and our delivery team does the coordination on that. I don't have the specifics about how to volunteer for that, but I'll ask about that and come back next week and answer that more precisely. We've got some interesting questions that are not going to be answered here. They're great questions. How does Holo compare to Hedera in terms of tech architecture? What potential do you envisage for enterprise adoption? And will Holo interoperability with current hyperscalers? That is a great question for the next AMA. I'm going to have that kind of shoveled over to that group, and I think David Atkinson would be a great person to answer that. Where can we learn more about the swap from hot to Holo fuel? There is a lot of information that will be coming out. We've shared a lot about the swap from hot to Holo fuel. I actually would be great if people ask more explicit questions about that. Not that I'm going to answer them in this launch update, but we've been preparing a lot of documentation. The thing is that this is the area that is probably the part that we are least able to answer in detail, because this is the part where we have a subsidiary company that's doing work to where everything that has to be licensed essentially with relationship to the HoloFuel reserve, and the kind of coming into HoloFuel and going out of redemption of HoloFuel with hot. That is stuff that has to go through legal review. It's stuff that has to go through the licensing. We have been in conversations for years with folks in Gibraltar, but really we can't go through the whole process until we're right at the point ready for launch, because they're looking for all of those third-party audits to be complete. They're looking for how will this work in a precise way? Can you walk us through who are the third-party providers that are going to be helping to support the KYC process, those sorts of things. So we can answer them better as we get closer to the launch, and we will have a lot of information coming out about those right as we come up closer to the launch. Okay. Great. I think there's a question about a current issues that are being faced on HoloPorts. There's some things that have been going on for a couple of months that they're saying we haven't had a real update. I would say we haven't answered that question precisely with the previous one. I think this is related. There are a couple of folks in particular who have hit some problems on their HoloPorts that we have sort of just put a hold on. They're in what we call our tier 2 support um, process, and we're not certain if the HoloPort is one that's that is gonna need some sort of like re-imaging or some other sort of update, because we're making changes to the HoloPort, the HPOS, the HoloPort OS is going to be updating still one more time before we get to launch. We're waiting until we do that to actually address those issues. So you're basically in a hold pattern until that work has happened and until we've actually put that out into the alpha environment at least. Yes, my HoloPort is outdated when we go live. It's been running 2 years now. Will it be updated? Yes, that's the HoloPort OS update that I was just talking about. Who is planning to build on Holo? Well, we've got people already that are building on Holo and are even hosting on Holo in sort of these private networks that are in test right now. So if you've seen some of the socials, I think that have gone out about some of the gaming companies that are using Holo and Holo, they're using HoloChain and Holo both together for some identity for their users and for basically the onboarding of that. So there's already folks that are starting to use Holo hosting, and in that capacity, there's going to be other apps that come in later. There's also gateway services that are going to be needed. If you guys were around a year or so ago when we were demonstrating Fractal Tribute, which was that collaborative art game that we demoed at one of the conferences last year, and then we did a few more times. A big portion of that was hosted on Holo as well, and that's what made us be able to do the gateway to the NFT platforms. So those are the kinds of things that people are working on already, are working on currently, and will continue to come onto the platform after launch. Okay, great. There's a few more. We have just a few more minutes, I'd say. I don't really know what our time is. Are there plans for a virtual machine application for those who don't have HoloPorts and want to host? And so, if so, can you give some launch timelines, please? That's going to definitely be a milestone that's post-launch. And I don't have timelines for that, but we actually are starting to develop our milestones for post-launch because we already know what a bunch of those are. And so we'll share those when those become available. Can you confidently say that after the one-to-one swap, HoloFuel will be live on exchanges? Otherwise, people who decide to swap will sort of be locked into Fuel if they don't intend to host themselves. So I can't confidently say when HoloFuel will be live on exchanges. That is up to exchanges making that choice, and they have to host a HoloFuel node themselves to do that. So as we get closer and through that process, we'll know more. We'll know more when people make commitments, but until we're live, they're not going to do that. The other thing is the one-to-one swap is just the time that we're guaranteeing it. It's also not that we expect it to necessarily suddenly shift from one-to-one in some extreme way post that period. What it means that as things like exchanges beginning to have HoloFuel on their exchange listed come into play, that can actually start having some minor network effects to that price because of the way that the price is calculated. It's really based more on the demands from hosts, but as you've got different things happening in different places, there can be some shifting of the price across these different places where you can purchase and redeem specifically. So that's the answer that I can say right now. And could this episode or future episodes be run on the Weave using presence? The Weave, if you haven't heard of it, is a wonderful groupware application frame for creating groups and running applications together. We've actually been using it. We've been doing what we call dog fooding internally with some of our teams to use it for collaborating on like our sync notes for some of our meetings. It's still a little rusty. I mean, this is still something that's in a lab context. It's not in a production context. These applications are not production ready. I don't know that we could have 156 people on presence at this point. I don't know that they've done any testing at scale to see how many people it could support. So it's not something we're planning on doing with these episodes or these sessions, but I hope to see some good updates on those in the future. Great. I think that's all we have time for today. And if we have other questions that come in, we'll take a look at those in the next session. Thanks, everybody.